Hello. Hi, Jitendra. Am I audible?
Yes, hello. I can a bit um,
I
to
I am visible to you now. Am I?
uh, yes, it's okay. It's okay. Maybe a bit more distance to the microphone because it is. Um, I
Give me a moment. Am I visible now?
yes, yes. It's good now. It's good
Oh,
now.
wonderful, wonderful. How wonderful to see you again. In our previous meeting, when you were attending one of your classes, I couldn't talk to you. I felt so bad. There was some sound issue in that class.
Um, there is still a little distortion, but well,
Can
more.
you hear me? Can you hear me now? Not
Oh,
audible?
hmm.
Am I not audible?
Oh, mm.
I'll try to speak from there. वो वाला माइक से हाँ और सॉरी उधर उधर का व्यू करो जरा Can you see me now? But yes,
Yeah.
can you hear me now? Is it audible?
Well,
Am I
your
clear?
your voice is a bit over controlled, but
Oh, wait, you are perfectly audible to us.
uh, therefore it is a bit distorted. It's not the problem of the connection, but maybe the problem of the microphone. I don't know.
You are audible. You are perfectly audible.
I at least I hope you will understand me well. Will you?
Yes, yes, I can. I can understand you perfectly.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm glad.
He cannot hear us.
Welcome you back. We hope you had a refreshing book. After an enriching series of discussions, we now move to our second plenary speech delivered by Professor Matthias Freise, who has joined us online. Dr. Matthias Freise is a professor of Slavic literary studies at the University of Göttingen, Germany, with expertise in Russian literature, literary theory, and comparative studies. His research covers major figures like Dostoevsky, Chekhov, and Millers, as well as themes of symbolism and avant-garde literature. He has published extensively on Mikhail Bakhtin aesthetics and the works of Anton Chekhov. As the director of the Seminar for Slavic Philology, he plays a crucial role in advancing Slavic literary scholarship internationally. Please join me in welcoming Professor Matthias Freise for his plenary speech.
Hello, good afternoon to India. Good morning in Göttingen, Germany. And thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm very glad to have the chance to explore some questions which are hardly ever answered, but at least asked. So first of all, my interest in world literature rose gradually. I was appointed professor of Slavic literatures at Göttingen University 20 years ago, and my field is already rather big and rich. It consists of 13 Slavic literature in 13 different Slavic languages. So not only Russian, but well, we have three groups of Slavic languages. East Slavic, that is Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian. South Slavic, which is Croatian, Serbian, Bulgarian, Bosnian, and West Slavic, Polish, Czech, and some more very small Slavic literatures. And but as I told one of my colleagues from the German department, well, as we both know, we are not here because we are interested. Well, you are because you are interested in Germany, or I am interested in Russia, but because we are interested in literature. So naturally, world literature is what literature in any language written, and this is why I built up the teaching program of world literature since 2018. And well, we are teaching, of course, according to how I taught Slavic literatures before, and go on to teach Slavic literature. So we did not abandon Slavic literatures, but it somehow differs from some other approaches to literature, because specialists in Slavic literatures have a particular approach to literature, which has to do with the tradition of literary science in Slavic-speaking countries like Russia, Poland, Czech Republic, because in these countries there was developed a method which was initially called formalism, but later on transformed by a very famous and important Czech scholar, Jan Mukařovský, was transformed into the functional analysis of the semantic potential of a text. So that's what we do. And the first distinction we make, and this is also important for the topic I will be talking about today, is the difference between the pragmatic space and the semantic space. As long as we are in the pragmatic space, we are dealing with circumstances, with pragmatic, realistic goals. We also, in the pragmatic space, we also deal with the representation of reality, the mirroring of reality, but this is not the function of literature. The function of literature is bound to what we call the semantic space. So how to get from the pragmatic space into the semantic space? So how to look at literature, well, I would even say in a completely different way. That is, if you shut off all realistic aims and convictions and simply go into the interrelation between words, between sentences, between semantic units, between meaning, and so there is no way to get into the semantic space without getting rid of the pragmatic space. So this is why we, for example, do not accept the point of view which was, well, for quite a time popular in the Soviet Union in the 1930s till 1960s, that literature is a reflection of reality. No, if it would be a reflection of reality, reality would always be more interesting and more important than its reflection. So if literature reflects reality, then I would always say no. It makes no sense to deal with literature. We rather deal with reality itself. So if literature, for example, criticizes political issues, then well, if you want to change political issues, just go and change it, and don't try to find something about that in novels. So once you get into the semantic space, the rules are completely different from the rules in the pragmatic space, because in the semantic space there is one central rule: interconnection is everything. So well, imagine you get into the semantic space and it's completely dark. You don't see anything. So to see something in the semantic space means you have to connect two poles. It's like switching on electricity, and then you have light. And you in this you don't see only the objects in this room, because this room does not contain any objects, but you see the relationships, and the light gives you an imagination of the whole of the semantic space. So this is already a precondition of how to understand world literature. World literature, if you read one text of world literature, you already have an idea of the whole of the semantic space. So some students asked me, oh, how can I study world literature, so many books, so many languages? But world literature is already contained in one text because it is interconnected with everything. So the question about great and small countries and great and small language communities, how this question is connected with the possibility of great and small literatures is, of course, if we are exclusively in the semantic space, this question would be absolutely futile. But of course, there are certain pragmatic preconditions of the production and the reception of literature. And for them, of course, the question, are there great and small countries and language communities? Are there great and small literatures? Is playing a role. So, well, I will start with one of the most famous protagonists of the world literature discourse, the discussion, the worldwide discussion on what is world literature. That is David Damrosch. He pleaded for the inclusion of not so well-known literature from smaller, in particular, non-European countries. So, for example, I heard a contribution from him about literature from Vietnam. So, of course, I very much agree in this with Damrosch that there are many literary voices and literary languages which are overheard, which are not known worldwide, not not sufficiently appreciated. And but for David Damrosch, world literature still is defined as literature translated into the world language English. And this still has a little bit of a colonial point of view. In a not only politically, but also culturally multipolar world, we should take account of the multiplicity of literary languages. Furthermore, it is still an open question how we could compare the literary quality of literature in different languages from different cultures. You might know Emily Apter's book Against World Literature, where she furiously opts against the translatability of literature. So her point is that there isn't such a thing like world literature because literature in its essence is not translatable. And the reason for the intranslatability is the explicit and implicit semantics in texts. So the semantic freight a word carries in a language is not identical to the semantic freight, the associations, the word history, and everything which goes into the semantics, into the semantic space, seems to be untranslatable. In this, she is, of course, right, but that does not mean that we could not appreciate literature in a foreign language, because language is learnable. So you might think that, oh my God, no one can learn all literary languages of the world. So again, the term world literature is in question. So I will discuss the complicated interrelation between literary quality, language, and nationality, because I would say world literature is not only a quantitative term, but also has something to do with quality. So the simple answer on the question, what is world literature, is all literature from all countries in all languages is not feasible. So a way out of the dilemma of what might belong to world literature seems to be to leave it to every country, every cultural or language community to provide the world with the best it can give by its own measures. However, this alluring solution makes it impossible to honor possible greater achievements by one culture or another. Let's take the example of French literature. In France, if France, for example, would have to nominate its national poet for the Parnassus of world literature, uh, uh, France would have to play off Molière against Racine, Proust against Balzac, Baudelaire against Villon. So if there is only one slot for every nation, this would be, of course, much too small a place for French literature. But who, or on the other hand, of course, we could follow Pascal Casanova, the very important French specialist on world literature. She argued that France, and in particular Paris, is the kind of the heart of world literature, the meridian of world literature. So both are, of course, extreme positions, and oh, there is a kind of echo here. Okay, yes, no more echo now. Thank you. So we could ask where we could play out the Champions League of world literature. One possibility would be the arena of popularity. But with the reader's response to literature, we have to be careful for two reasons. First, small language communities have a naturally smaller reader response than bigger ones. And secondly, unfortunately, readers are often unable to realize the full amount of the semantic power, the semantic potential of a book. They might prefer or turn down a book for its political bias or for explicit scenes in it. So, well, of course, we have to ask for experts here. And as I will try to show, the only real experts in this are the authors themselves. Also, the nomination of national poets as candidates for a literary Parnassus would perpetuate a nationalistic view on literature, while literature is made for the world and not just for the home country. Also, authors more and more often cannot or don't want to be assigned to a single country, or their home country might even dismiss them. There is one interesting example. When I traveled to England some years ago, I visited the home of one of my favorite English poets, who is Lord Gordon Byron. And at Newstead Abbey, his home in England, very, very nice place, I read a plate saying, "Here lived the infamous poet Gordon Lord Byron," the infamous poet. This kind of thrilled me, because everywhere else except in England, of course, Byron is not an infamous but a famous poet, and Don Juan truly is one of the great masterpieces of world literature. So the home country may also not be the referee for belonging to world literature. Well, to approach the question a bit more systematically, we have to note certain asymmetries in the grand orchestra of world literature. First of all, the number of native and non-native speakers of the language a literary text is written. Secondly, whether the language of the text is an official language of a nation. For example, there is a language, Low German, which was, well, still 150 years ago, it was the main language in the whole north of Germany, but it never became an official language of Germany. So Low German is not an official language in Germany, but Dutch in the Netherlands is. And you might wonder why I compare this. Dutch is identical with Low German. So this is the same language, which is a national language in one country and another national language in another country. So of course, Dutch in the Netherlands had much more, much better possibilities to become a language of literature than Low German in Germany. Although there is, of course, literature in Low German, but well, Low German is dying out in Germany because of mass media communication. Local and regional languages have big problems. So even well, with our students, we had an excursion to a famous place in the heart of Germany, the Wartburg, where Martin Luther translated the Bible into German, and he translated it to High German, not into Low German. But there was also the same town we visited, Eisenach, was also the hometown of one of the most famous authors of Low German literature. But now, well, he was very popular 100 years ago, but now he is almost forgotten. So it's a bit bad fate for these regional languages, which are not officially recognized national languages. Well, and for literature written in these languages. And another example, which might be very close to you, is Sanskrit, the classical Indian language. Well, I read that there are still about 14,000 speakers actively speaking Sanskrit as their native language. Well, I did not, I don't know, I did not prove that, but well, but of course, still it is a very important language of literature. But once you don't have any more native speakers of it, there is of course a kind of hurdle or even wall to climb to get access to this literature. Another interesting example from Europe is Occitan language, which was a really, really important language literature in the south of the south. Well, again, there is some kind of echo here. In the south of France, and which influenced Italian Renaissance literature and early humanist literature, in particular Francesco Petrarca, very much. But it never became an official language of France and was suppressed by the official French language. So despite the fact that language and nation are concepts which are completely independent from one another, in most countries, economic, social, and political power tends to privilege one language and literature in an allegedly national language. However, the asymmetry which is most important for the understanding of world literature is what I would like to call transliteracy. That is, the ability to read not only in the own native language, but also in other languages. This is also my main argument against Emily Apter's Against World Literature, if you don't mind the pun. Even if genuine literary texts are untranslatable, the language they are written in is nevertheless learnable. Well, I had no idea of Russian. I did not know a word of Russian when I enrolled in the Slavic department. And I had learned Russian and Polish and Czech from zero. But I learned it. And so now I can appreciate literature in these languages, I would say, rather well. So, well, there was a time when I attended conferences in Russia where some of the discutants would say, well, a foreigner whose native language is not Russian will never understand our national poet Alexander Pushkin. This, I would say, is not true. And I had several occasions when I proved that I had a deeper understanding of Pushkin, Tolstoy, or Dostoevsky than any of my colleagues in Russia. I would even say there is a certain problem with literature in your native language. Maybe you had such an experience already when you discuss a literary text with a native speaker and you mention certain rhetoric or other subtle devices, symbols, metaphors, and a native speaker would simply read over this because they read too fast. They read too fast and they do not appreciate, well, the whole subtlety of taste in the words and in the connection between words. And they don't realize all the associative potential because they are too much bound to the pragmatic use of this language. Because native speakers use this language usually almost exclusively in the pragmatic space for their everyday life. So for them, it is even more difficult to switch from the semantic view of texts into the from the pragmatic into the semantic view of texts. And for us foreigners, well, for me, Russian is not a language of everyday communication. For me, Russian is the language of Tolstoy, Pushkin, and Dostoevsky, and Chekhov. So I move in the semantic space much more freely and much more exclusively than many native speakers of Russian. So I think this is a big argument against the Emily Apter, who stresses that because literary texts are in strict sense not translatable, this is the reason why there is not such a thing like world literature. No, world literature may be not translatable, but still accessible through learning the language. And there are, of course, languages which are accessible exclusively through learning them, because there are no native speakers of them. Sanskrit may have some 14,000, well, compare 14,000 to 1.2 billion speakers of different languages in India. So the percentage will be 0.001, something like that, native speakers of Sanskrit. But it is a learnable language, and you can appreciate literature in Sanskrit through learning. And we have a similar situation, of course, in Europe with ancient Greek and Latin, very, very important languages of literature with no native speakers. Even native speakers of Greek have their problems with ancient Greek because, well, there are big differences. Of course, they learn it at school, but they have to learn it. They don't read it intuitively. So now I return to this term, transliteracy. With this term, I mean, we can understand two different phenomena. One is readers' translitery, and one is authors' transliteracy. What I was talking about so far was readers' transliteracy. That means readers should be able to read literature not only in their native language, but also in learned foreign language, learned second languages. But there is one problem with this perspective for transliteracy, that is that readers usually concentrate on a handful of super canonical authors who are or seem to be in particular worth and necessary to know and to read in the original, like Shakespeare or Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. So there are people, of course, who learn German for Goethe or learn English in order to be able to read Shakespeare in the original English language. But the vast majority of authors would drop out here. They are read by non-native speakers of their literary language only in translation or not at all. So here Emily Apter would join in again and say, yes, of course, maybe readers are able to learn, apart from their native language, one or two main world languages like English or French, and that's it. So they would, well, read Proust in the original, Shakespeare in the original, and all the rest of world authors would drop out. So again, she would say, given the argument that literature is untranslatable, then what follows is there is no such thing like world literature. But I would have another argument against Emily Apter, and that is authors' transliteracy, which is very different. Authors are, I would say, obliged to be informed on world literature in as many original languages as possible. They are the true professionals. They devote their whole life and their whole professional activity to literature. So this does include much more than the respective European classics from Horace to Petrarch, Proust or Kafka, even more than the actual worldwide trends in literature. Authors are even obliged to dig up almost forgotten gems of world literature, because without reference to them, literary innovation is hardly possible. So these authors are our scouts of world literatures. We readers, if we read them, we can be confident that through them, through their professional access to literature in many languages, we readers are also connected with world literature. So, well, some people might think writing literature is an easy task. Everybody can write. So let's sit down and write novels. But in fact, to produce world literature, to produce true literature, you have to do a very hard job, a very hard job. You have to know not only what's going on actually on the globe. Literary trends are now global. They have been, well, regional for some time. For example, literary epochs, well, from Renaissance to, I would say, to realism, were European epochs. But I would say since modernism and then avant-garde, post-modernist literature is absolutely global. It's everywhere. I heard very interesting and read also very interesting articles on Chinese modernism, on South American avant-garde literature, and so on. So now literary trends are global. But this is not enough. Authors also are obliged to go into literary history, and they have to dig for literary gems. Why? Because what is literary innovation? You do not, well, first of all, one precondition of literary innovation is the feeling that, well, you can't write the way you did before or others did before you. There's a kind of feeling of being exhausted from the way to write, or simply it is impossible to write that way anymore. I give you a very actual example. I would definitely state that the epoch of postmodernism in literature is over, because you cannot play with ideological bits, mix them up, make puns out of them, putting in some irony, declare the author is dead and things like that. That doesn't work anymore for several reasons. And one reason, of course, is the different, well, framing pragmatic conditions of literature. Well, the game of literature has become very, very serious again. And every new generation discovers an aspect of literature which had been neglected before. But they do not discover it for the first time. In order to be able to discover it, they have to go back into literary history, because always it turns out that there has been a time when this aspect has been very, very important and central for literature. But later on, it was discarded in favor of other aspects of literature, which came to the foreground, and the other one, which was important before, went into the background. This is also a model of literary development developed by Russian and Czech formalist school. So you have a dominant tendency and you have a kind of subdominant tendency. And if there is a need for innovation, you have to look for literature which solved cultural problems long ago, but problems which are similar to the problems which came up right now and which cannot be solved by the literary trend which was immediately previous. So our actual literary problems cannot be solved by postmodern literature anymore. So there might be some authors who not yet realize this shift, but it is massive. And postmodern literature already reads as if it would have been from the day before yesterday. So, well, authors are the scouts of world literature, and in order to be these scouts, they have to find forgotten old texts, old concepts, and not only refresh them, but to adopt them to the similar to analogous problems which we have right now in culture. So authors are those who are providing access to the ongoing process of world literature. They are the professionals representative for us all, since we, without their mediation, don't participate in world literature. Everything else, I would say, is provincialism, not worthy to be world literature. By provincialism, I do not mean the material. So you can take material, text, time and space on a very, very microscopic scale. And this does not mean that the literature you produced is in itself provincial, but for example, the Polish author Bruno Schulz, one of my favorite authors, who despite his slender body of stories is one of the most important European authors of the 20th century. Bruno Schulz needs only the setting of one tiny provincial town in western Ukraine for his what was called jungles of metaphors. Provincialism does not succeed in disclosing the universal in the particular, and this is what Bruno Schulz does. In Phenomena, in this tiny town of Drohobych, we see a huge semantic space is opening before our eyes. There is one story called August, which consists of a little walk on the marketplace of Drohobych, which is a square with four corners. So he walks with his aunt, first side, second side, third side, fourth side of this marketplace, and with this he opens a whole cosmos of meaning, of semantics, of metaphors. It's almost incredible. So this is not what I would call provincialism, but a typical example of provincialism is if literature is fixated of one personal or national trauma. For example, Poland is a country which suffered from 4 partitions. This country was parted between its neighbors and ceased to exist several times. So much of Polish literature from the 19th century consists of this trauma and of complaint about the about losing national sovereignty and the pressure from Germany to adopt the German language and from Russia to adopt the Russian language. But this trauma, of course, is provincial because, well, it's not your trauma, it's not my trauma. And the problem of Poland's partitions is hopefully, concerning the last political movements, hopefully solved. So Poland is safe to exist. It will not no more parted between its neighbors. So, but maybe this also explains why Poland is in a very particular position concerning the war in Ukraine, because Ukraine is on the way to be also parted between Russia and the West. So, on the other hand, also in Polish literature, of course, even if you mention this trauma, you can nevertheless have access to world literature. For example, the Nobel Prize winning poet Czesław Miłosz from Poland, he wrote one novel called The Isar Valley, and it is very Polish because it is a kind of idyllic space where on the horizon a catastrophe is approaching, but the idyll is still there, but it is under danger. And this feeling of, well, we are a paradise, but it is under danger, is very, very Polish, but it is also a universal understanding, which can be understood in India or in Switzerland as well. So it is part of world literature. So there is no difference in the danger of provincialism between small and big countries. And for example, in the 21st century, the once top world literature, Russian literature, became more and more provincial, concentrating on national problems like the veterans of the Afghanistan war or the Chernobyl catastrophe. So I don't talk about political pressure here. I talk about free and sometimes even exiled literature from Russia, but still these authors who also, for example, Alexieva, she earned the Nobel Prize of Literature for a book on veterans from the Afghanistan war. But, well, it is very much concentrated on Russian problems. I would say Russia is on its way into provincialism since the turn of the century, and this has nothing to do with Vladimir Putin. And on the other hand, literature from tiny Ireland was hardly ever provincial. James Joyce's Dublin is a cosmos in every respect. It's a semantic cosmos containing everything. Sometimes oppressed nations tend to provincialism, but by far not always, because Ireland also was a nation under great pressure from England, and yet it did not become provincial. There is an old myth that strong national economies produce strong literatures, but Germany, at its very literary peak from the 18th and on the turn from the 18th to the 19th century was a very weak country economically and politically, but a rising star in world literature. Another example, in the 17th century, Poland for some time was one of the strongest economies in Europe, but it reached its literary heights not in this period, but earlier in the 16th and very much later in the 20th century. Literature depends on individuals who grow beyond their beliefs, their class, their gender, and their nation, what they do when they enter the semantic space. That does not mean they lose class identity or gender identity or national identity. Rather, they see all these identity in a dialogue with other identities, which sharpens their view on themselves. Dostoevsky, for example, the famous Russian writer, was a staunch nationalist and anti-Semite, but when he wrote, he was able to transcend his beliefs. How is that possible? It is usually called the literary conscience, but research on this phenomenon often mistakes it for a form of ethics. The literary conscience is not an ethical term. R.P. Blackmore wrote a book, well, in the 1940s, so almost 100 years ago, The Expense of Greatness, and there he defines the literary conscience as the responsibility of a writer to be no less than excellent in both matter and manner. But this is hardly an applicable definition, because excellence is not an attitude, but a quality, while conscience has to be an attitude. I would like to define it differently. Literary conscience is the aim and achievement to cross the border from the pragmatic space of goals, convictions, interests, into the semantic space of interconnections, equivalences, ambivalences, symbols, and myths. Once in this space, all cares fall away, all affiliations, all plans. If anywhere, world literature is there. So finally, I would ask, but nevertheless, are there preconditions in language, nations, or culture for being able to cross this border from the pragmatic to the semantic space? First of all, there should be cultural support for the belief in a semantic space. A doctrine like socialist realism, which denied it, does not support it. However, the absence of pragmatic pressure is no precondition. Under the condition of war, atrocities, hunger, or poverty, sublime pieces of world literature, like actually in Ukraine, or like Grimmelshausen's work in Germany during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, may emerge. On the other hand, such conditions, despite the fact that they are rather productive for plots, do not induce the emergence of world literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pricey, for that enriching session. Now the floor is open for questions. Hello.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question right now.
Hello, Matthias.
Hello.
Is it audible? Can you understand?
Yeah. Hello, Sudha.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Same here. So nice to see you after so long. All right. So if I speak something, you will be able to comprehend and answer the questions.
Yes.
All right. All right. Is there a question, please? I think he can.
Maybe you come so that see better. Yes.
Good afternoon, Professor Matthias. Am I audible? Thank you very much for this, hello, good evening. Yes. Thank you very much for this insightful talk on the pragmatic and the semantic swings of literature. I have two questions. Sh- First is we talk about the national official language, the need for a national language, so official language for world literature. Where do you see the space for folklores and informations for India's coverage for thousands of years? Where do you look at how do you situate the still these folkloric structures and traditions in the
Oh,
space of world literature?
it's very poor. So I did not get the question, I'm afraid.
Hello. Hi, Matthias. Is it audible? Can you understand?
For some reason, I can understand you much better than the other.
Is it because of the internship? All right. All right. I'll rephrase the question. Okay. So what is asking that when you're talking about national languages, when you're talking about the politics of translation and transliteration, he's asking where do you place the tradition of folklores, especially in the countries like India? What is the destiny of this culture?
So,
What is the destiny of the folklore culture?
uh, so folklore and mass media. Did I get it right?
This place media, what is the tradition?
The definition.
Folklore, where do you see the folklores?
Uh, well, folklore
Uh,
is a form of literature which mainly is um, uh, well is oral, right? Folklore
yes.
has an
Mm,
oral basis, and mm, folklore is uh, mm, well, in fact, uh, the famous Brothers Grimm, they stated that folklore is something of a national culture. But of course, research in the 20th and 21st century proved that this is not true at all. Uh, because folklore is not only a global uh, phenomenon in a way that folklore exists in every culture, in every language, but also that folklore is interconnected almost magically. Um, mm, so there is maybe no better example for the interconnectedness in world literature than folklore. Um, uh, my wife is a specialist on fairy tales, and she uh, works on the motive of Sleeping Beauty, uh, and uh, she um, uh, found a long history of Sleeping Beauty in European literatures or European folklore since very, very early times, early Renaissance and humanism, till absolutely recent times. Graphic novels from last year on Sleeping Beauty. But she also found a Sleeping Beauty story from Bengal literature, which seems to be rather famous. You might ask how come they are connected, but they are connected. This is not sufficiently, I would say, this is not sufficiently researched, how this interconnectedness, this world quality of folklore, it was and is possible. Well, nowadays, of course, we have mass media, which we immediately can, switch on YouTube and see, I would say, let's say Tamil folklore on on YouTube, right? But in former times, this was impossible, but still they are connected. So, there is a large collection of world folklore. A long research project centered in Göttingen, by the way, a world encyclopedia of fairy tales. But they do not explain the interconnectedness. They only show that it is everywhere.
Oh, thank you so much. This was fantastically related, actually. I'm reminded of Katya's lecture at Bonu when she was talking about sleeping and the metaphor of sleep.
Maybe you take the microphone a bit more far away from your mouth, and I would understand it.
Okay. Is it more comprehensive?
Much better.
Better.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So what I was saying is I'm reminded of Katya's lecture at JNU.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Then one more question in the chat box. Natya,
Yes.
there is a question which has been written in the chat box, if you could see that. There is another question which we have posted in the chat box. Can you open the chat box?
I didn't get that question.
No. It's not a question. Another question has been posted in the chat box. We have typed the question. Is it audible from here? Can you hear me, sir? Is it more audible from here? Good evening, sir. Is it more audible from here? Are you able to listen? There's a question in your chat box. Okay. All right. Maybe I'll send you that question later, and then you know the time, and maybe I can get in touch with the professor and tell him. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. As we conclude this day, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our esteemed speakers, participants, and attendees for making this conference a grand success. We now invite you all to join us for evening tea. Thank you, Professor Pricey, for such a good session. We all learned how to shout today, and we are extremely sorry we were not audible. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you so much. Is it audible? Thank you. Maybe you turn the camera around, we can clap so that you can see that. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow for another insightful day of the conference.
Thank you, and I hope we meet again soon. Bye-bye.